Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And this week saw the deployment or the start of the Guardians Gala, one of those seasonal events that does come back, but I kind of like what CCP has done here. They added a little twist. Basically you get some extra objectives that you can do in wormhole space and in certain regions that are themed after the pirate factions that are involved in the Guardians Gala, and that way you have a way of getting your compression related skills early. I think that's very nice. Players that are very dedicated or perhaps groups that want to farm that kind of stuff can get an advantage out of going hardcore for the Guardians Gala event. So I think that that's pretty cool. It does mean that we still don't really have any news on what the next plans are for EVE Online for CCP, but I think it's becoming more and more clear that CCP is going to push everything towards FanFest. That should be in April. I just hope that they stick with what they've done for previous FanFests that have been able to actually take place, and that is that they do release all the dev blogs and all the information a little bit before FanFest itself, so you can start to speculate, start to plan, and that they can have the real and free discussion at FanFest itself. I personally can't wait to see what is coming next. Let's, as always, also take a quick look at the new Eden store. Oh, and that actually cuts the music now. Interesting. I haven't spotted that before, but alright. So we got some Eros Blossom skins that are front and center. Obviously, Valentine's related skins at this time of the year do make sense. And if I'm not mistaken, you can also earn some special skins through the event that actually look pretty cool for, very specifically, the pirate ships. On the services front, nothing special to report in the store. I do know that there is some sort of I think double training sale that's happening now on the website. Let's see if there's an impact on the market. So that means that we can go straight into plex and stuff, and that is starting at 215. There we go, and let's get started here with our plex prices. A little bit above 2.9 million for the sellers, a decent chunk above 2.7 million for the buyers in GDA 4.4, and then if we look at the buyers in the player-owned trade hubs, a little bit more aggressive, but not by too much. And then the sellers coming in at 2.9 million for a couple thousand in the Tranquility Trading Tower, but in general, obviously, this is a price range just below 2.8 to just above 2.9 million. That feels like it's the same as last week. We got a little bit of upwards pressure for the average prices, but I would personally say that the margin still feels pretty much the same, which to me makes a lot of sense. I'm still expecting and personally am still in that wait and see approach. A lot for me depends on what CCP actually announces and plans for the game, and I think that's the same for this entire market in general. Next up, we've got the multiple pilot train certificates that did just absorb a sale and are still struggling to just go anywhere or go back towards that 1.4, 1.5 billion high point that it knew in November, December, and here in January. So we basically fell back on the sale, and it takes quite a bit of time actually for the train certificates to move. They are a pretty niche market, above 1.25 billion for the sellers and just below 1.2 billion for the buyers. Quite noticeably, the margin has completely collapsed on all of this. This does mean that there is demand for these training certificates. We're still trading, a couple days ago, 50 in a day, which is 2 to 3 times more than the normal average. And so these lower prices are attracting competition to try and snag the cheapest possible. So I will probably see a slow burn up when it comes to what's happening in the multiple pilot train certificates, renormalizing the price. Probably not towards that 1.5 billion. I think we'll be at FanFest and we'll know more by then, but definitely expect higher prices, and that is going to be pretty tricky to actually make one of these buy orders happen, which is why they have to be so aggressive. Next up, we have the skill extractors that of course follow plex very closely, and you can see basically the hesitation in the market here. The chart is not moving anywhere, staying just above the 330 million mark. In the player-owned trade hub, sellers coming in just below 330 million, buyers at 325 for the first one, 315 for the next. So we gotta be honest, this is one buyer that is definitely willing to pay a little bit more in order to trigger a buy order. And then in JITA we're just below 330 million as well. Very interesting to see that. These must be recent. Yeah, they are. So we do quite often push back above the 330 million in JITA 4.4 in order to get these average prices. The impact on these skill injectors, let's take a look at those. Large skill injectors, yep, had a bit of a pullback from a one-year high point, so this is of course quite relative as well. 680 million and above was the highest price we've seen this year for the large skill injectors. Kind of normal that you have to pull back from that a little bit, especially if it's just in 3 months that you go from 570 to a 680 price. So we had that pullback, and now we're basically just like with Plex, with the extractors, with everything else in that wait and see pattern. Decent volumes, so people are definitely taking their positions and still using the large scale injectors. I think that's normal with compression on the horizon. But 552 million for the sellers and 617 for the buyers. That to me feels like a pretty decent and normal margin. So not too much pressure on either side. Basically, this market is well supplied and is trying to wait and see what happens next. So small scale injectors, I would expect the same. Yeah, a little bit more of a strong pull up again after falling back down to 130, 135 million average price, and is now basically stabilizing around this range as well. Currently selling for 134 million, buyers coming in at 120. Again, a little bit more margin than what we're honestly used to in this segment, at least from my perspective. And I think that is because players are, waiting and are taking their positions or have taken their positions, and so you do get this calmer market where, all right, if someone is needing to sell a small scale injector right away, they're willing to pay the 120 price. Most people hope to get the 130 plus for the small scale injectors, but the fact that buyers have been able to go on below 120 is actually pretty impressive. That's opened up the price and the range for the movements here a little bit as well. The daily alpha injectors next, after a jump, I think it was 2 weeks ago, towards 45 million, have again slowed down. 45 million for the sellers, 40 million for the buyers. To me, it is going to be interesting to see where this is going. I'm personally of the opinion that at least part of this jump here from a little bit above 40 to just below 45 million will have been due to the Doctor Who event. Lots of players or lots of people taking a look all of a sudden at EVE Online. Obviously, I think a lot of people that are not too invested in the game or don't know too much about the game will start with a free-to-play option, and then that daily alpha injector does become very interesting all of a sudden, especially if you get started into exploration. It's actually a doable goal pretty quickly after starting your EVE Online experience, and for now it's actually holding on, but that could of course just be because there are plenty of alpha players out there that have made that their routine, and even for them, considering this full 1 year chart, a below 45 million range is probably not that bad. But I'm curious to see if we'll see like a pullback. That would indicate, in my opinion, that the Doctor Who event spike would have been temporary, or can we maintain and perhaps even go up in price, which to me would indicate that maybe more alpha players remain active in EVE Online. Finally, we've got the hypercores that are continuing their decline again from a relatively high price point. A couple of months ago, we were at the 1 year high point of 330,000 ISK, but it's interesting because the hypercores are tied to number one, the Hypernet relay, of course, so maybe there's a little bit less activity and thus a little bit less gambling. And on the other hand, it's also one of like the most liquid tied to ISK type of items, and so this does not, in my opinion, indicate that like the market is fearing just general inflation or anything like that. Less than 300,000 for the sellers, haven't seen that in a while. 275,000 for the buyers, again a decent margin. So I would say an orderly decline in the price here, where everything is still pretty much in balance. We're not overselling massively and thus crushing that margin. Buyers are just slowly evolving together with the sell price. So it's definitely a pretty interesting time from the perspective that we are seeing that hesitation in the market in general. All those that have been above, well above average and towards 1 year high point just a couple of months ago are having to give back a lot of these gains, and then they just start to move sideways, hoping for news that could bring a different direction to the market. But this is basically where we're at the moment. Let's see what's happening in the minerals next, coming in at 10 minutes. There we go. We will start with titanium, which has to give back a little bit, but to me feels pretty healthy. Is staying above 4.5 ISK, which is still a pretty good return on your high-sec mining activities. 460 for the sellers. Couple of smaller orders. It was 465 when I was checking and making the ticker down below, and this is perhaps the first bit of bad news. Buyers have gone below the 450 mark. Up to last week they were still above that, so that felt like it was really good. We were going to be able to defend that 450 price range pretty easily, but this is definitely a little bit of pressure that is starting to mount, and once you go below that 450 on the buyers, you can go down very quickly towards the 436, and that would push sell prices even lower quickly as well. So if this has any momentum, we could definitely break that 4.5, and that would be bad news, I would say, for the return on investment for the time that miners are investing in high-sec. But you've got a couple of months where you definitely had a good time focusing on titanium. Let's see if pyrite can stem the bleeding. Last week it was still going down, and yes, finally we have a bottom that has formed on some buying. So I would say this is not a natural bottom. This is an investor's bottom where they're saying, yeah, this is definitely too low. Seeing a 12 ISK on that pyrite, I'm gonna start to buy, because eventually we should go back if we're looking at what's happening with titanium, if you're looking at what's happening with Mexalon. But since then, after that, we're actually back on a sideways movement. We're not pulling back up towards 15 ISK just yet. So we're talking 13, just above 13 ISK for the sellers, and 12.54 for the buyers of pyrite. So we had to lose a lot of ground for investors to come in, and then at the moment we're still not in a situation where pyrite above 15 ISK can be made a reality. Supply still seems to be a little bit too high for that. Volumes are definitely down in the last couple of days as well. Then we've got the Mexalon chart that's doing the exact reverse. It's actually pretty impressive for Mexalon to climb its way back to 75, despite what we're seeing in both titanium and pyrite, that is seeing a little bit too much supply for their current price ranges. So 73 for a couple of sellers, but getting back up to 74 pretty quickly. Some sellers are finding their way in the market, but 69 as well for the buyers of Mexalon, just below 70 ISK. So there is that strong demand. I would say this week we do have potentially that switch where up until last week it was all right, focus on titanium and Mexalon. If there's a little bit more supply that's pushing those buyers even lower, I would say focusing on Mexalon becomes just your number one priority if you're mining in high-sec in EVE Online. Next, my favorite of the bunch here is Isogen, and well, I really like this because this is of course my prediction coming true, with Isogen shooting up to 175, breaking through that resistance at 125 where we were stuck for several months, and then doing a nice push up. This is another 50 ISK pretty much added on these daily averages, which is like almost another 50% increase in a matter of a couple of weeks. And let's see what we're actually at. 178 for the sellers, 173 for the buyers. And I mean, it is still the same story. There are still Isogen reserves out there, and so someone's coming in here with 30 million units and a couple more 150 million unit sell orders. But you can also again see that prediction that they're probably starting to run out of steam a little bit, because they're spreading those sell orders out a little bit more. The pattern that has clearly changed now is that we're seeing more and more of those couple million to couple 100,000 sell orders having their way in between those big ones, because there's not a ton of them anymore. There's not someone that's then going to go, oh, 100 million units here, well, and 50 million units here. Well, my next 30 million order, I'm going to actually put it at a 179.89 or something like that. I mean, I know it's not possible anymore, but that point wanting, right, getting as close as possible to the previous big order. No, then we're spreading back up to 212, and then here we're going at 216, and here we're going at 217, and then we're going at 224, and a very big one at 225. So this to me does show that this market is seeing that problem, that we are nibbling and eating away those old reserves. Sure, they're getting a better and better price, but it's no longer needed to be super aggressive with all of those reserves. A little bit of patience will probably lead to an even better price. You get a more spread, and as the competition starts to take shape around the actual supply and demand. And now I don't know what the actual price is going to be, of course. This starts to feel far more realistic with Mexelon being at 75 and Isogen being at 175. And remember, a year ago, Isogen was at 50 and Mexelon was at 125. So that reverse has completely gone the other way, back to the normal way that you would expect a low SiC mineral and a more harder to get, less used mineral to be more expensive than the other one. And this does start to feel like some real momentum in that recovery. So on the one hand, right, it's very good news, of course, because the story is coming true and people that mine for Isogen in low SiC are finally getting rewarded for the risks that they take. But how much higher can we go? That's the real question that I don't really have an answer for, because we still have those reserves that are potentially keeping things in check, but eventually perhaps they're overshooting their estimate as well, and then we could start to see a more normal pattern rather than just a straight up line basically over the last 6 months or so. We would find ourselves more into the next mineral pattern, which is Noxium. You can see here, this is far more reasonable, far more normal when you're talking about active supply and active demand. You've got a wavy pattern within a range, but at the most expensive range of all the minerals, 1000 to 1250. And then now, apparently on more demand, that has obviously helped Isogen as well. We broke out to a 1250 to 1500 ISK for Noxium here, but I can personally see on a little bit less activity a recovery back to a lower range here as well. So Noxium is going for 1367 ISK, buyers are at 1346. This is also that very big difference. This needs to come from low SiC, and thus the margin between sellers and buyers is super thin. And then just look at these volumes, right? 6 million, 3 million, but almost everything else on the front page is just a couple hundred to a couple 10,000 units of Noxium. And Isogen should be like a step above that. Obviously, it's going to be easier to get more Isogen, but we shouldn't see 30 million, 100 million units that are actively being produced and brought to the market. So it is interesting. This does start to feel like a volatile jump up, where if this has some momentum, I do think we can still go higher. That 225 is an interesting gamble, you could say, on that person that has those 600 million units. But it is interesting that this now finally has that momentum. And so I think the market is completely realizing that, yeah, this isn't going to last all that long anymore. This cheap Isogen is bound to run out, and then we'll actually have to have that price discovery phase. Next up, we've got Zydrine from nullSiC. Quite a different picture, obviously far more stable, and below 1000 ISK is apparently where the market's willing to go. 975 for the sellers, 930 for the buyers of Zydrine. And the big difference, you could also say, well, all of this stuff is also imported, so why isn't this the exact same thing as Noxium? Well, because in nullSiC you've got far larger, far more organized groups that have well-oiled transport machines as well, that they can basically have that steady supply of Zydrine to high SiC as well, in order to probably sell at a profit, which is a lot harder to do in low SiC. And then for Megasite next, we get, well, a little bit of a different story, which I still think could perhaps somehow go up even higher, because it is still 30% below Zydrine, despite the fact that Megasite, historically speaking, has been more expensive. Now, you guys obviously and correctly point out that you can get more Megasite and probably some more Noxium from other spaces as well than just nullSiC, and that's going to be part of the added volatility and the price difference between Megasite and Zydrine. But I do personally still feel that supplies from nullSiC will eventually dominate, and will eventually, they'll dictate the price, they'll dictate the range, and then we'll see far more stability as well. So Megasite going for 724, buyers at 710. That's also, a more narrow margin here, which is normal for an imported good. And then finally, we got the Noxium, no, not Noxium, but the Morphite chart, excuse me, that, well, good news for producers, I guess, has broken down below 50,000 ISK and is at a 1-year low point. Sellers are coming in at 47,550, buyers at 45,500. And to me, this is also an interesting, a little bit of information. What was expected is to see the price decline here in November, December on the announcement that we're going to change mining. We're going to double all availability, and so obviously the rush took place first in morphite because it was just that valuable. Every bit of morphite that was out there was going to get mined, but it is still continuing. So I do feel like probably the mining potential and perhaps the quiet period in nullsec is starting to bring more and more supply online. That's also translating eventually in lower pyrite and titanium prices, and perhaps is also what's happened here in Zydrine and could push megasite back down as well. It really does remain Noxium and Isogen, I think, that will eventually take their place as some of the most lucrative mining activities because of that risk factor from LowSec. So it is pretty cool to see. Especially this chart right here that I've been calling for probably 1.5 years or so. So I've been predicting this to happen for such a long time. Even a broken clock is right twice a day, but here it is. We're clearly seeing that dynamic take place. Next up, the PI market, 2110. There we go. So for PI, honestly, more stability and no signs from CCP that anything is going to change. So I don't see good news, except perhaps for the fuel-related ones. So here are the broadcast nodes. Okay, bit of surprise. We are seeing a jump in price on some volumes. But again, let's put that in perspective. It's coming off of a 1-year low point where it was stuck for almost 2 months. Broadcast nodes going for a bit above 1.3 million and buyers a bit above 1.2 million. So normal margin here as well. Construction blocks next, bouncing off of the 7,000 and heading back to the 8K. That's actually decent news and not in line with my expectations. Look at that. Supplies in GDA not that great at 8,000 disc. And then we get buyers forced up to 7,500 disc. This is definitely interesting. The first time where I'm saying have people started to really move their production to more lucrative PI materials, and so that some of these refined materials are starting to finally get a different supply demand dynamic that's just not completely dominated by oversupply. Well, this jump back towards 8,000 on like yesterday's daily averages is clearly a part of that, or could be a part of that. It is speculation on my part. We are seeing slightly higher volumes, but not, in my opinion, enough to really completely buy out the market. Let's maybe take a quick look at what's happening if that trade has maybe moved to perimeter. Well, there are some sellers here, a couple of jumps out, but honestly not all that much. So then consumer electronics is doing the same thing. All right, yep, exactly. Managed to make its way above 7,000 disc, and this feels like a chart that could be there to stay. 7,860 for the sellers and 7,000 disc for the first bit of buyers. So that's definitely impressive as well. I did not expect to see this come, although again, basically it took a little bit over a month for this recovery to happen from a 1-year low point at 5,000 discs. So that's still really, really bad historically speaking. Let's see what Coolants is doing. All right, still in that 10 to 12,500 disc range, and at the moment back on a high period as well. Almost 13,000 disc for the sellers, 11,000 disc for the first buyer. Very, very high prices for Coolants. Even historically speaking, this is pretty damn expensive. So this is definitely, not what I expected for PI. I thought we would see more pressure because of the fact that, well, if there's anything that's probably going to be nerfed by CCP or that could get nerfed in the production cycles by CCP, it is the need for PI. But nope, so far all of them are actually up. Let's see if the trend continues. Well, cryoprotectant solutions probably not, although it's bumping off of the 110,000 ISK, which is interesting considering that this whole spike period here is due to an event that just dropped more implants, and I would have thought that we would recover back down to 100k and get buy opportunities sooner, but that's not happening. 115 almost for the sellers and well above 100,000 disc for the buyers. Really narrow margin here as well. For some reason demand is picking up. That's interesting. Next up we've got enriched uranium making its way to 10,000 ISK as well. 10,000 for the sellers, 9,400 for the buyers. That's again pretty pretty aggressive buying. It is tied to fuels, but this was, to my surprise, a good that was lagging behind coolants, despite the fact that it's actually harder to make enriched uranium than it is coolants, because the planets are less available than the just gas planets in order to make coolants. But it is working on a catch-up here, and 10,000 disk is actually starting to be respectable. Integrity response drones, maybe up a little bit here as well, heading to that 175 million. It's actually now 2 million in JIDA for the sellers and 1.8 for the buyers. So that still has to show up on the chart, but we actually made our way back up here. Very interesting. Next, we've got the mechanical parts, able to defend 8,000 ISK. That's also not that bad. 8K for the sellers. And look at that, 7,939 for the buyers. That's a crazy narrow margin for a PI good. Usually you'd get at least 500 to 1,000 ISK in margin. So this does show, for some reason, let me know in the comments if you know why, but PI demand seems to be back on the menu. Next, we've got the nanites. That also definitely countered to the trend of the last 6 months or so, has had a breakout point above 5.5. That is now being taken advantage of. So this pullback is not that crazy. 5.3 for the sellers, but still 5,000 disk for the buyers, something we haven't seen in a pretty long time as well. So, this is too big of a jump for a lot of sellers and holders of nanites to ignore, I guess. But there seems to be enough demand to keep us above 5K. Then we get the nano factories, also able to continue a bit of a recovery above 900,000, 950, almost a million again for the sellers, 800,000 for the buyers here. Those are, opening up a margin, not really willing to follow that much, but considering the general market, I would not be surprised if they're forced to. Then we've got organic mortar applicators. Yeah, that's not that great. 700,000 for the sellers, 660 for the buyers. Well, we can't have every single good start to go up, although our recursive computing modules have started to go up as well and are now playing with a million ISK on the chart. A million for most sellers and almost 900,000 ISK for the buyers. Robotics also making a 1-year high point above 70,000 ISK. That's been a very long time. It's still not a great price, but 70K for the sellers and 67,000 to the buyers. That is an unusually narrow margin for PI, showing demand seems to be back. Very, very interesting. Even self-harmonizing power cores is yielding a decent jump from that 1-year low point on increased volumes, back at 1.5 million for the sellers, 1.25 million for the buyers. Sterile conduits, a little bit of a bounce, but this is also normal from that 1-year low point. So that's just a 940 to 830. That's okay as well. Yukomi superconductors seeing a little bit of pressure, 76 to 71. That's more normal. And then finally the wetware mainframes also climbing out of the ditch, trying to at least getting to a 1.5 million. But this is interesting. This was not what I expected, but apparently to me this indicates we are seeing a pretty sustained demand all of a sudden in the PI market, almost across the board. Obviously not all of them, but that's actually pretty damn impressive, and a big change of pace in that PI market. It looks like the dynamic, maybe even the whole psychology there might have changed, or maybe someone knows something. Who the hell knows? Let's move on to the advanced moon materials, 2830. There we go. As always, we'll start with carbide. So here is crystalline carbonites back on a 1-year low point, completely recovered, you could say, from the whole bubble year that we've had with the changes to industry. Less than 140 for the sellers, 127 for the buyers, and here we're clearly in a completely dynamic different dynamic as well. We're oversupplied and the demand just isn't there at the moment. Then for Caldari, we've got titanium carbide. That is now also at a 1-year low point, substantially below 150 all of a sudden. 133 to 34 for the sellers, 131 for the buyers. And again, look at that domination. These are the buyers, including non-JIDA. These are the sellers just in JIDA. So this is massively oversupplied. 1-year low point, perhaps starting to look interesting as an investment opportunity, but of course the whole vibe of EVE Online, right? summertime. We had wars, we had the big volatility of the industry changes. All of that is not happening at the moment. So if you do decide to stock up on these advanced materials, know that in all likeliness you're not looking at a quick trade, but you're looking at something to hold for the very long term, when perhaps war breaks out again in nullsec and completely disrupts moon mining activities and things like that. Next up, we've got for Minmatar, it's the Fernite Carbide. Same thing, right? 1 year low point, just bouncing off the 125, I think. 133 to 128. Again, sellers, way more sellers than buyers. That's a big change in the market that was able to do really well for most of the year. Then we've got Tungsten Carbide that is not at a 1 year low point, but basically matches where we started off last year. So you could say that this one is lagging behind perhaps by a couple of weeks on all of the others. 133 to 130. Clearly that oversupply situation is happening here as well. For the metamaterials, we got Photonic Metamaterials. Also a 1 year low point. All right, I did not think that this would finally bleed through, but yeah, look at that. The first seller that's willing to dump 125,000 units at 9,250, and buyers are still just above 9,000, but that could break, and then look out below. For the Caldari, we've got non-linear metamaterials, also 1 year low point, heading towards 15,000 disc on the chart. 16,250 for the sellers, 15,750 for the buyers. And again, look at that difference now in supply versus demand. And then we've got Plasmonic for Minmatar. That's a big dive as well. Basically, this one held on really well up until 2 weeks ago, and now we're back below 15,000 disc. 1 year low point yet again, 13,500 to less than 13,000 for the buyers. And for Amar, we got terahertz metamaterials that again feels like it's maybe lagging behind a little bit. It's already below 15k, but it's not at a 1 year low point just yet. 14,000 for the first seller, again though pretty aggressive, 13,400 for the first buyers. So very big change here yet again. A complete loss of demand in the advanced materials tied to Tech 2 production, which honestly could be good news for volatility in Tech 2 ships. We'll see in a moment. Let's see what the other ones are doing. I think that's not going to be good news for them. Fermionic condensate is landing on 60k, which is clearly below average on the chart. We're going to go over these pretty quickly because I'm expecting to basically see below average prices here. 30k as well for ferrogel. So here we go. Fullerite's also now below 700 ISK. Hypersynaptic fibers diving down towards 1 year low point, but clearly below average. So they're suffering from that oversupply now as well, which they were already at low prices. Nanotransistors stuck on that 4k, which is clearly below average. Phenolic composites diving back down as well, clearly below average. Let's see if even these, maybe. Let's see if I can get some. Yeah, clearly now playing with that 10k, buyers should be well below 10,000 disc. Yeah, that's starting to build up in pressure here as well. Next up, we get the reinforced carbon fiber. I'm going to try to get something to show here as well, but starting to head for that 10k. Buyers are still well above that. All right, this one is holding on a little bit better. Ceramic fibers. Here's the dive as well. Sellers are at 320, but the buyers are just gone, completely gone. Where are the buyers in the advanced materials? Completely missing. Feels like they've completely disappeared from EVE Online. Very interesting. Back into PI and completely gone from advanced materials. What a big shift all of a sudden in demand, despite the fact that for me personally, I would say I would have expected the market to be way more in a wait and see, in a holding pattern. Let's see if there's an impact on the Tech 2 ships. 3350. There we go. I haven't made any moves last week, honestly, been playing some Path of Exile, so let's just go over the list. Here is Basilisk, and I would say good news if you're looking for volatility, because we're touching 230 million, which we haven't in 6 months. So this is one of those higher highs that we've finally been waiting for. Not that long ago, about a month ago, you could have probably bought it well below 180, and we are now selling at 210 to 220 million for most sellers, and 188 for the buyers. So we've got definitely a bit of a small slow trade. It took more than a month for it to completely materialize, but that higher peak is here, which we haven't seen in a very long time. I think the Cerberus, yeah, not doing that just yet, but maybe that means this is a buy opportunity. 210 million for the sellers. You're buying a Cerberus below 200 million ISK, which is below the entire chart. And well, if the lower demand in advanced movements and then that first spike in the Basilisk is any indication, I would say trying to grab a Cerberus below 200 million makes a lot of sense. Next we've got the Guardian that is starting to bounce off of the 190. Unfortunately, we would have to see a breakout to like a 230 or something like that to really see volatility come back, but at least the bottoms aren't continuing to go down anymore. 200 million for the sellers, 183 for the buyers. This is basically that no-go zone. We're too much in the middle for me to really make a move on the Guardian just yet. Then we've got the Hound that is also coming back down. Had that one spike that gave us hope for volatility, but unfortunately we're back on the downtrend for the high points. Still, we are, I think, creating a buy opportunity here. 24 million for the sellers. No, unfortunately not. 23.3 million for the buyers. That's such a narrow margin here that I would not be making a move on this one. Then we've got the Ichthyorsa coming back below 650 on average, 650 to 606. Well, I'm keeping this one mostly to keep an eye on Triglavian potentially activity and things like that, but it is potentially a tradable ship as well, although you do need almost basically 1 billion ISK to risk on a single trade, which is quite a lot even for me in my opinion. I don't really like to do that, but at the moment we can see that pressure if we're touching the 600 million again. Let's see where the buyers are. They're still at 606. If you can buy below 600, that would, in my opinion, never be a bad deal at the moment for the Ichthyorsa. Except, of course, you never know what CCP is going to announce next when it comes to maybe the tricks and fanfests. We'll see. Next up here we get the Ishtar, still struggling, so that could perhaps still be a buy opportunity. 192 million for the sellers, 180 for the buyers. So you're buying Ishtars close to 180. That's so much below the entire chart. I would honestly not blame you to jump in on that one. Then we've got the Manticore. That feels like it's too much in the middle. 28 to 26 million. Yeah, that's unfortunately not the place to buy. If the chart touches 25, you're buying well below 25. That's your jumping point for the Manticore, in my opinion. Munin, okay, another first little sign, but we got a new high at 230 million on some of these daily averages. At least it's trying to give us a little bit more volatility. Sellers at 216, so it's being plucked pretty quickly. Buyers still below 200 million. They feel no need to move away from that. Nemesis, 1 year low point, interesting, 21.4 million for the sellers, buyers 18.4 million. This is one of those, in my opinion, outspoken buy opportunities. With that one warning, don't now put all your ISK into that Nemesis trade potentially. Try not to spook the market, but buying up to 4, I would say. I think 100 million is definitely never enough to really spook the market. If you can buy 4 or 5 of these well below 20 million ISK, I mean, honestly, even at 19 million, that just to me feels like an incredible deal, especially knowing that the Hound is now selling for 24, buyers at 23, and then you get the Manticore selling for 28, buyers at 26. Then obviously you're buying a stealth bomber for 19 million. That feels like it's in a pretty good spot to at least try and stock up on these. Do I have any holdings? Yeah, I got Nemesis that I bought at 19.5, including taxes, so that I bought well below 19 million. You can even outdo my buy on the Nemesis on this downtrend, a 1 year low point at the moment. Then we got the Oneros making its way back above 180. Again, at least it's matching the previous highs. We need to see it really roll over and go through that. 180 for the sellers, 161 for the buyers. Honestly, if you still want to buy on Oneros, you can, even at this price. Although I would wait for the chart to be going down to give yourself a better chance to grab one. Panther continuing to see a bit of pressure on potentially the industry cost of Take 2. Below 1.1 billion for the sellers and buyers below 1 billion. Then we get the Purifier back below 25 million, buyers at 23. Not outspoken enough, but if you really want that trade, I think it's okay to buy a couple of Purifiers. Maybe I'd just do one of these, to really not spook the markets. And then another one that gave us that glimmer of hope here was the scimitar that broke out to 210 million when we touched 180 a couple of months ago. Is working its way back down, 200 million for the sellers and still below 180 for those buyers. But at least, this is another one, just like with the Basilisk, this is another logistics cruiser, so it might be tied to that. But clearly, these are signs that hopefully we are now starting to basically run out of demand and thus production. And that is going to, have those stocks move around in availability and could potentially create that increased volatility. Then we get the Widow continuing to go down in margin as well, well below 1.1 billion for the sellers, well below 1 billion for the buyers. And then finally the Zealot, that's bouncing off the 180 on a little bit of buying, but way too timid again, unfortunately. We need to see more of this, right? Break out to 230, break out to 210, give us those sell opportunities. So it's not there yet. But that massive drop-off in demand for advanced movements, for me, is worrying for the segment, but hopeful for volatility in the Tech 2 ship market. We'll see, of course, in the upcoming weeks and months if I'm right or not. And yeah, know, of course, that actually all of this, I'm really surprised at all of these potential shifts that we're seeing in the market psychology, despite the fact that, FanFest can really still change everything. So we'll see what happens. Tech 3 ships next at 41 minutes. There we go. As always, we start with the destroyers, and yeah, the Confessor, at least it's stopping its ascent. It went to almost 70 million ISK, but it's still just below 60 million on the chart. Yeah, 60 million for the sellers, 55 million for the buyers. This should draw in demand, or supply I should say, but it's not bringing as much supply to really bring the price down very quickly. I'm surprised that it's able to plateau here for basically a week straight at 60 million. The Hecate is continuing to go back down towards 50 million, so we should see supply here, 51 to 50 million. Yeah, look at that then. We get another 26 here, last couple of days, here another 18, another 24 in the last 24 hours. So clearly the Hecate is still drawing in the supply, despite the fact that it is now well below the Confessor. So if you bought here, when I mentioned that this should be a buy opportunity, you could have probably bought close to 40 million on the Confessor. You're now selling them really easily at 60 million. There you go, 50% profit on that one. The big change is that there is way more inertia all of a sudden in how these guys are going to communicate. So my expectation is honestly that it is going to take a monumental effort apparently for suppliers to bring in the Confessors and bring that price back down. It could take a little bit more time, and then we'll have to of course see what the impact is here. You're buying Hecates now at still 50 million, so I wouldn't just yet, but let's see if the Jackdaw is maybe low enough. That one is now below 50 million on the average price, below 50 million for the sellers, and starting at 46 million for the buyers. If I want to try and anticipate now on all of that supply that's going to be needed to bring that Confessor back down, and considering how slow it is for it to materialize, maybe buying a Jackdaw at 46 million could already be a good idea. Maybe we're a little bit early because, as I've said, apparently all of that supply has just massive momentum, and maybe we can wait for an even better price. But this is completely different. I thought we would see a far sharper drop off and way more supply in the Confessor already. It's just not happening, and the Zwepel is still going nowhere. That is as completely decoupled. Very weird situation, right? Confessor's going for 60, Hecate's going for above 50, Jackdaw still going for 50 million as well, and the Zwepel is very happy to stay in its 45 to 47 million range, with 48 now for the sellers and 44 million for the buyers. By far the cheapest one, which, well, I'm now very hesitant, and I'm gonna say actually no, I would not be jumping in on the Zwepel. I would be jumping in on the Jackdaw if I had to make it a trade in these tactical destroyers, despite the fact that you're paying more for the Jackdaw. I think this one has just more potential on everything that's going to be taken away by filling that Confessor gap. We will, of course, as always, see if I'm right or not in the upcoming weeks, but that's would have definitely been looking back now, right, this is where the confessor was, but it takes almost 2 months, and then this was what's happened with the jackdaw, and I said, looks like a good idea to buy, and the Hecate, excuse me, and the jackdaw was also like well above 55 million the whole time, and yeah, you could have probably bought confessors at around 40 million ISK. So that's what's happening, but it's just really slow, way slower than what I've been used to in the tactical destroyer market. And perhaps the reason is that we are seeing, different types of moves in the cruiser market. Here's the Legion touching 180, so we're talking 175 now for the first seller, 166 million for the buyers, and continuing this. Considering this full 1 year chart, I would say, I would not blame anyone for jumping in on one of these legions to take that gamble you're buying very, very cheaply. The Loki is holding on very well at 200 million, so why the hell would the Legion all of a sudden drop off to less than 170 in value? It just doesn't make that much sense to me. The Loki is holding on really well. The Proteus is also dropping off to 180. Now for the Proteus, it is the least popular one still when it comes to the tactical destroyers. 178 to 167, you're buying below 170. You can actually try it as well, but know that for me personally, I'd need to see a little bit more momentum on that downtrend, and I would try to buy even below 160. And then the Tengu is actually going up in price, breaking out to well above 200 million, 207 for the sellers, 184 for the buyers. I think this could be tied to the event. I think Tengu is the PvE Tech 3 cruiser, and that it might just be the one that's being used a lot for the Guardians Gala. And finally, we get an extra product, which was sort of a request. It's going to be for a little bit of salvage, so that's coming in at, let me see here, 4610. There were a couple of specific goods, but I can't remember which one, so we'll just reasonably quickly go through the list. Materials, and then we've got normally salvaged materials. We'll just go for the regular salvaged materials on this one because it is already a pretty big list, but normally we've got alloyed titanium bar, 1 year high point, almost 7,000 ISK here, 69254. Very big jump in price, very impressive. Okay, not sure where this is coming from, but starting off really well. And this is just the Tech 1 that has gained like almost 50% in value in about a month, a little bit over a month. Armor plates, not at the 1 year high point, but clearly also did a nice climb in price from 25 to 30,000 ISK over the month of January to early February. Artificial neural networks, slow upswing, so this is still not that great. Broken drone transceivers though, definitely trading at the high end of the range at 20,000 ISK. Burnt logic circuits, that's a different story. These are still really low, below 20k on this full 1 year chart. Capacitor control circuits, capacitor consoles, excuse me, up as well. Again, late January, early February, breaking through that 50,000 mark, not bad. Chart micro circuits, those are down. I think the really cheap ones will be down a lot, but quite a few of these, look at that. Conductive polymers up in 3 months from below 10,000 ISK to 20,000 ISK. That's a 100% increase in price in 3 months. That's quite a lot. Conductive thermoplastics, are we selling at 25k? No, running out for some reason. So this is a very bad chart. It is tied to Tech 2 if I'm not mistaken. So I can't really give you guys too much information here. But yet again, this is Tech 1 stuff. Contaminated Lawrence fluid, 1 year high point pretty much, 150,000. Contaminated nanite compounds, again same late January, early February spike. It's not a 1 year high point just yet, but it's a pretty damn decent recovery. The current pump is not doing that great. Damaged artificial neural network had a big December bump here and it's basically normalized. The effective current pump, also good January, good early February, coming back down a little bit from that, but still quite reasonable. drone transceivers, not that hot. Electromagnetic, metaprismatic, goddamn, all those names, guys, excuse me about that, but breaking out close to 1 year high point, plus 30,000 for the sellers, and buyers for stuff, well, no, not really, 14k. So it is apparently, I think, gonna be absorbable by the market, but the sellers are clearly having a pretty good time in a lot of their salvage at the moment. Look at that, enhanced ward consoles up to 4 million ISK a pop, yeah, from 3 million. Very, very interesting. So thank you very much for that, for this suggestion, because this is not what I expected. I thought maybe even with the alpha clones coming in from the Doctor Who event, that, you know, salvage is also one of those side activities that's always pretty easy to do. I expected more supply. It's not across the board. Fried interface circuits not really moving anywhere, but here we go, another bump in the hyperbolic meta transistor arrays. The impetus consoles are up in price as well. It's more of a recovery, but it's up again in the last couple of months. Intact armor plates, very high, doing a little bit of a jump down, but from 5 million ISK, that's basically from a 1 year high point. Intact shield emitters at a 1 year high point at the moment, 840,000. Interface circuits, not that great, definitely close to 1 year low point. Logic circuits, not too hot. Lawrence fluids, not that great. And then the shield transmitter, that's a slow burn, but definitely recovering over the last 3 months yet again, from 500 to 750, 50% increase in price or value. Melted capacitor breaking out above 20k. Micro circuits not doing too well. So these are some of the good old Tech 2s that I remember as being quite valuable. They're not doing that great. Nanite compounds are high. Power circuits, no, recovering from a 1 year low point. Again, another one of those good old Tech 2s that I remember. Power conduits, 1 year high point, 1.25 million. Scorched telemetry, 5k, definitely expensive. Single crystal super alloy I-beams are back at 1 million pretty much. Smashed trigger units, very expensive again as well. Tangled power conduits above 150. 0.150, let's see, actually 170,000 for the sellers. Telemetry processors also breaking out. Man, this is very, very interesting, because I've actually been doing some side salvaging whenever I ran anomalies in the last couple of months. I've got a pretty sizable cache of of salvage. I'm gonna look at selling some of that stuff, because trigger units are high, trip power circuits are not high ultra, but this one is definitely at a high point as well. And then finally the ward consoles also up from 20,000 to 30,000 in the last couple of months. So I hope that I touched on the two materials that were requested in that comment as well. But taking a look at just the regular salvage materials market, which is actually not difficult at all to produce, and actually got a boost as well. You get Tech 2 salvage drones now, you get even some faction salvage drones that are like super strong, that will increase your efficiency quite massively, and that value for quite a lot of them is actually up 50 to 100% in the last couple of months. We get some 1 year high points, we get some that are lagging behind. Obviously it's not completely uniform, just like with PI and with any segment, but it is very, very impressive to see some of these increased prices, increased values for your salvage. So I've actually been salvaging without selling. I might actually look into selling some of the stuff that I've got lying around there as well. And that will be it for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.